Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's edition of the Client Enrichment Series. My name is James Patopoulos, and I'm a strategist in the Public Building Service Office of Client Strategy, but more importantly, I am the host for today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few housekeeping instructions. We have automatically muted your audio to help us control the sound quality of the presentation. There is a chat pod as well as a Q&A area. For this session, please use the chat pod for any administrative issues you are experiencing, and one of our CES team members can assist you. We ask that you use the Q&A pod to ask your RWA and policy questions. We have a team of subject matter experts with us today to answer any questions you have during the presentation. Any questions that we are unable to get to today will be noted, and all questions will be answered and posted on our site, gsa.gov/CES. Today, we're going to be hearing from Laura Beth Hawkins, a program analyst with the Reimbursable Services Center for Customer Delivery Office and Project Delivery. She started her career with GSA in 2004 with Region 6 Finance Office, where she handled the formulation and execution of the reimbursable budget. It was at this time that she joined and helped create the RWA national team in developing the program into what it is today. She is from Kansas City, where she lives with her husband and 6 dogs and a menagerie of other animals. Jesse Perigine is the RWA process lead in the reimbursable service branch, which is now located in client strategy. Jesse was a central office employee performing the same role, and prior to that, from Region 8, where he was a construction project manager working on mostly lease projects. His experience varied from small renovations to complex new space. Prior to his work as a construction project manager, Jesse worked as a leasing specialist for 3 years. He grew up in New York on Long Island and relocated to Golden, Colorado in 2015. He and his wife have 2 young boys. In his spare time, Jesse enjoys running local trails, cooking, and gardening. Now that you know a little bit about our speakers, I believe we have our first poll question. We'll go ahead and launch that. Which of the following roles best describe your involvement with the RWA process? You can select all. 1, project manager, contracting officer, budget finance manager, fund certifying official, or if that is not listed, you can put that in the chat pod as well. So we'll go ahead and end the poll. Looks like everybody's voted. And we'll share the results. Looks like 39% project manager, and then it's 20% or so contracting officer, budget finance manager. So we've got a lot of project-oriented folks on here, including contracting officers. All right, we'll go to the next poll question. I think we have another one. So poll question number 2, how often do you access eRETA? So this is the external RWA entry and tracking application. You can pick daily, weekly, monthly, once a year. And what is eRETA? So we'll give you a couple seconds to answer. And we'll go ahead and close out the poll and share the results. All right, looks like 40% is monthly. So we've got some folks that are using this quite a bit. We've got followed by weekly, and we do have some folks that answered what is eRETA, and you are in luck. So if you are in the what is eRETA crowd or just need a refresher, we have opportunities throughout the year titled eRETA Digest. These sessions are live and recorded for those needing additional resources navigating the system. So plenty of time to get acquainted with the eRETA system. Today, we're just going to focus on the RWA and policy side of things. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to the team to begin today's presentation.
All right, thanks, James. And thanks everybody for attending today. A really huge thank you of answering those poll questions because they help Jesse and I understand how to deliver this training to you today. So hopefully it's going to be a great training for you, and we're excited. So to start with, let's just kind of go through our agenda here. We're going to start with, understanding the basics. This is going to be boring probably to most of you because you probably already know what is an RWA and stuff, but we still have it in the presentation for any of the newbies that we have out there. From there, we're going to go into know your rules. What governs the RWA policy coming from appropriations law and stuff. So we're going to go through our RWA National Policy Manual. I'm just going to go over some of the highlights in that. I'm not going to go over the entire manual, but we're going to go through some of those highlights. From there, we're going to go into the project and process, getting your RWA from getting your work request from the work request stage to an actual RWA. In there's going to be a lot of information on like e-RETA access, your work request versus the RWA. What is that entire process? Like I said, we're going to go through amendments, what happens when you need to add additional money to it, and know who to contact. But also there is in that section a surprise slide. So when we get to it, we've got a surprise for you. All right, from there, let's flip to the next slide. And we're going to do understanding your basics here, which is, basically what is an RWA. So on the next slide here, the RWA is basically our OMB approved interagency agreement. It's the contract. It's basically PBS promises to deliver services and or goods to your agency, and your agency funds us with the RWA. So like I said, it's pretty much like a contract. It is our OMB approved interagency agreement. But I know some of you probably have questions out there because of G-invoicing. So are we going to start using G-invoicing? Yes, we are not there yet. Likely, or not likely, at some point next fiscal year in 27, we will be incorporating G-invoicing into this process. But we're not using it at this point is what I wanted to let you guys know. Additional communication about it, when we're closer to that time, will be sent to you guys so you'll understand what and if anything changes in this process. All right, so let's go to the next slide. And now we're going to get into, know the rules that affect your RWA. This is basically going to go into appropriations law and why we do what we do and why we have it in our policy. So to start this off, we're going to talk about the funding authority. So GSA PBS basically works with 3 different funding authorities when you guys submit your projects and or services to us. So the first is our Federal Buildings Fund. Basically, any work that is done, work or service that is done in a building within PBS's jurisdiction, custody, or control, we run under the Federal Buildings Fund. What this fund allows us to do is provide you those goods or services, but then gives us a 5-year liquidation period, basically, to do that on your non-severable projects. If it's a service and it's a severable project, that's a different story. We're going to get kind of more into that later in these slides. But basically, that's our Federal Buildings Fund. The next funding authority that we could use is what we call the construction of buildings, or basically 583. We will use this funding authority for anything, for any work that is outside of our jurisdiction, custody, or control. So it's your own agency building. It's not owned by PBS. We don't maintain it, nothing. So we do projects for you guys sometimes in your own buildings. And if we do, and it's construction related, we will run it under the 583. The 583 pretty much mirrors your Federal Buildings Fund, meaning if we bring it in under that funding authority, we have 5 years to actually liquidate, get that project done for you. The last funding authority that might be used is the Economy Act. The Economy Act is also used for any buildings that are outside our jurisdiction, custody, or control. So it's, like the 583, but not, because the Economy Act is different. The Economy Act will basically be used for any work that's not considered a construction of building, basically. And it does limit us on the reobligational period. So what that means is whatever type of funding you guys are using, if we have to run it under the Economy Act, we have to obligate the funds on our side prior to the expiration date of your funding authority. So it's not one that's actually commonly used because, most of the work we do, it deals with buildings. So if it is outside our jurisdiction, custody, or control, we can usually use the construction of buildings, but those are the three potential funding authorities we would use. So now let's go to the next slide. And let's talk about your scope of work. We're going to go through some of the appropriations law things here that, basically dictate and tell us, what to do. It's how we do it. So the first is, documentary evidence. We've got to have the documentation there to support a valid obligation that includes a clear description with a level of specificity there. So that basically just means, the obligation that you guys made on your books, we have to have the documentary evidence there to show that's for the legal purposes it's supposed to be. So the next thing, which kind of ties into that a little bit, is your use of funds, meaning you can't use funds for a different purpose. Example here, you submitted an RWA to do some work on floor 2. But all of a sudden you want to also do some work on floor 3, well, we already have the documentation to show that the work when we took in the RWA was floor 2. So this is a different purpose then. I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm about ready to lose my voice, and that's not good because we just started this. But the use of funds is basically you can't use the funds for any different purpose than you originally identified it. Kind of break it down like to this: who, what, when, where, and why. Your intent, your content, it context, the whole 9 yards there. We got to know who it's coming from, which is you guys, the agency, what exactly you guys need, when, more towards your subbable service side, but when is this need here, where it's going to be. So we need the location, and the whole why part of it. All right, so let's flip to the next slide and let's go into the timing of this, more appropriations law here. So the other part of it is your bona fide need. You have to have a bona fide need in order to submit a work request to us. Actually, let me rephrase that. We have to have the bona fide need before we can accept an RWA. I just want to clarify that there real fast. We cannot accept the RWA without an actual bona fide need there. So what is bona fide need? It just basically means you guys have a purpose. We cannot park the funds for you. That is something that, sometimes gets tried, but, basically you've got to have a need for that particular work. Another thing that kind of ties into or goes right along with it is your Anti-Deficiency Act. So we need these RWAs first before we can start the project. We cannot knowingly enter into a project knowing there's not enough funding to complete the project. That's the whole Anti-Deficiency Act appropriations law piece out there. So that's very important that, any work, we have that RWA in hand first. So let's kind of take an example here, and it's kind of a commonly confused area. So I just wanted to talk more about when we do work within one of our lease locations that's within our jurisdiction, custody, or control. When we are doing like a new build-to-suit lease or, start a new lease and everything, you guys have those TIs to fund part of it and stuff. We have to have that RWA in hand prior to the lease award, which means, you've come to GSA, you have the need there. An estimate has been done, to show that the costs are going to exceed your TI allowance, and we do need some money to cover that above standard tenant improvement allowance. The RWA must be received prior to them, because if it is not, then it's considered anti-deficient, because the lease award acts as a contract and we wouldn't have the funds there. Now, there are times when maybe you're doing a new lease award and the estimate comes in below the TIs and actually no funding is needed. That is fine too. But the lease award establishes your bona fide need there. So maybe we are 2 years, 3 years down the road, and maybe some change orders and everything has actually increased your costs. That's fine. It happens. It happens all the time. But if that happens and now you're above your TI allowance and you actually need to supply the money, you will have to submit an RWA in that is using a funding source that was available to your agency for new obligational purposes when the bona fide need was established. Well, in this case, like I said, your bona fide need was established when that lease was awarded. So we might be in 25, but that lease was awarded in fiscal year 23. So you would have to supply a funding source that was available to you for new obligational purposes in 23. All right, so that's a little confusing. I just kind of wanted to talk about the leases on there. So let's go to the next slide. And let's talk about it's basically our liquidation period, the execution. So when your agency submits us the funds, you're using a type of appropriation, whether it's annual, multi, no year. We'll talk about that here in a second. But, the liquidation period is how long we can work that project, execute that project for you until, I like to say, poof, the funds go away. Technically, the funds closed and they're no longer there, meaning, you lost the obligational purposes, whenever that expired, but you've also, at that time, the fund closes and nothing can be paid out of it. So, per appropriations law, the liquidation period is 5 years to the end of the fiscal year. So if you're using an annual funding source, let's say it's this year, fiscal year 26, and September 30th of 2026, that fund then closes for new obligational purposes, but it remains there for the liquidation period, your execution part of the project, for 5 years until the end of the fiscal year. It just from 5 years, 5 years to the end of your thing. So let's go to the next slide. And like I said, we'll talk about the appropriations types. There are 3 different appropriation types that your agency might have. You might have all 3 of them, you might have only one of them, but these are potentials, which is your annual, what I talked about. Annual appropriations are ones that are going to expire at September 30th of that year. You could be funding the RWA with a multi-year, meaning it's good for new obligational purposes for more than 1 year. I personally have seen it anywhere from 2 years to actually 20 years for a multi-year. But your clock does not start ticking on the liquidation period of that multi-year funding until that last year. So, say it's 26 funding, but it's multi-year and it's good through 2028. Your liquidation period clock doesn't start ticking until September 30th of 2028. And then the third is a no-year funding. No year is just that, it's indefinite. It never expires. So, really that's a pretty long liquidation period there. So let's go through this example on the next slide. So here's this is just an example of the period of availability for an annual. We took in an RWA, it was using an annual fiscal year 23 funding source. So that means we had, 24, 25, 26, 27, and 28. So on September 30th of 2028, that poof, the funds go away, which means you can't expense anything more out of those funds. So on the next slide, just kind of gives you an example of the multi-year funding. This is 23, 24 funds. So technically those funds don't expire for the new, for any new obligational purposes until September 30th of 24. But, you have until September 30th of 2029 to actually liquidate past that expiration period. So while this is all in good, this kind of gives you the brief thing. The next slide I want to talk about is, what happens on closing expiring funds after they do it? And I have both those words there, and let me explain it. So closing is actually the technical term that's used in appropriations law, but a lot of people over the years and time have actually called them expiring funds. Regardless, those are funds that are going to disappear at the end of the fiscal year and go, like I said, poof, they're gone. Meaning, you can't expense it, it can't expense against it anymore. So what happens if that happens? Does it happen? Yes. Does it normally happen? No, we don't like it to happen. But I just want to kind of go through the closing expiring funds for you on what is possible to make this right. So let's say you have an RWA that's expiring on September 26th of this year. September 30th, I'm sorry, of 2026 of this year. So, we're getting close to the wire, but the project is not complete. We have more work to do and more expenses to the contractors and stuff. That's fine. So what can we do prior to that fund expiring and closing? A permissible funding swap might be possible. And what I mean by that is you just can't swap the funding with current year funding. That's not legal. That's a bona fide need violation there. What I mean is maybe your agency has a multi-year or an annual funding source out there that was available for new obligational purposes when the bona fide need was established, which is basically the year we've taken the RWA. So maybe, it's going to expire this year, but you have a know your funding source. You can fund swap on that RWA with the know your fund source to cover the remaining amount. Now, what not to do is to actually, so say you have it, it's closing this fiscal year, do not close the RWA and try to submit in a new RWA with current fiscal year funds to cover the remainder of that project. That, like I said before, may result in a bona fide needs violation. That is not what we're supposed to do. So what happens if you don't have any funding to swap out and you've got to write this one out? You've got to let it close on September 30th, and then come October 1st, you would need to amend that RWA and decrease the expired closed funds on there of what we did not use, only amount that did not get paid back, and then add a current year funding source to supply the remainder of the funds for the project. So that's how we handle, the closing expiring funds. All right, so we went through appropriations law. Now we're going to get into our RWA National Policy Manual. And to start this on the next slide, we do have one update to the National Policy Manual. Can we flip to the next slide, please? So on the National Policy Manual, there is a memo and addendum that we have to it, which is basically electronic payments. I'm sure most of you have already heard we had the executive order last year that basically wanted to get the government away from paper checks and the whole 9 yards. So in our policy manual now, if you are not an IPAC pay customer and you're a non-IPAC, you can only pay now electronically, basically through pay.gov. Pay.gov does have options too. You can either pay by credit card via pay.gov, or they have ACH options if you'd rather pay through an ACH from your agency. But we have to take payments electronically now for the payments. All right, on the next slide, let's highlight in policy our antecedent liabilities. So what is an antecedent liability? Because this is also actually another commonly confused area. Antecedent liability is when costs have arose on your project for unforeseen conditions. So maybe it's increased to the material or the labor costs, during the time of the project. Happens a lot, especially COVID, because once stuff is pretty cheap, COVID happens, stuff went up in price a lot. That is considered an antecedent liability. Or maybe when you get into the project and you're, moving a wall or something, maybe there was duct work that needed to be moved that wasn't identified on the regular plan. So you need to get that duct work moved to, to be able to give you guys the project you asked for, your original intentions. That is an antecedent liability. Antecedent liabilities do happen. They're fine. And that's the only way mainly you can amend an RWA past the initial year of acceptance of it. So what I mean by that is maybe we took an RWA in now and next year your costs have increased. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. And maybe next year you want to add some scope to it. You cannot add scope to the RWAs after the initial year of acceptance, regardless of the funding source you use. So that means even if you're using a no-year funding source that is actually indefinitely open for new obligational purposes, you can't do it after the initial year of acceptance. All right, we'll discuss more on these antecedent liabilities and how to handle them more in the process slides down below. So let's go to the next one and highlight another important factor of appropriations law, which is full funding versus incrementally funding. Full funding is a requirement by our National Policy Manual. Incrementally funding a project is actually strictly prohibited by appropriations. These two kind of go hand in hand. So what do I mean by that? So full funding is basically when you ask for a project to be done, and maybe let's take an example. You want to recarpet and repaint 2 rooms. You know, the estimate that we provide you is going to provide the funding for the carpet and repainting of those 2 rooms. However, when we submit it to you, we have to, whatever we say the price is, say $100,000, full funding is you guys giving us the full $100,000, not just saying, oh, well, I got 75,000 down. We're going to go ahead and give you 75 and then we'll give you another 25. No, we need the full funding up front. Because like I said before, it's an appropriations law that we cannot knowingly enter into a contract knowing there is not enough funding to cover the contract. So this also goes hand in hand, like I said, with incrementally funding, which is strictly prohibited by appropriations law. So what does that mean? That means trying to fund a project over time. So let's take another example here. Maybe we are doing a large project for you and the cost to do the entire project comes out to be $1 million. And you come back to us and say, hey, we have $750,000 of this year's money we can put towards this, but we can't give you the remainder until next year. So that is what is considered incrementally funding a project, which is strictly prohibited by appropriations law. We cannot do it. Now, what you can do is you can break that scope up to clearly defined deliverables, meaning let's say you're doing renovations on floor 1 and floor 2, and that's the estimate we gave you. And your agency doesn't have enough money to do both the floors, but you have enough funding to do maybe one of the floors. So you can clearly define the one RWA just to do floor 1 and provide the full funding for it for us to do. And then come next fiscal year, provide us the second RWA to do the second floor. That is permissible, but it's got to be clearly defined deliverables in the scope of work. All right, another hot topic of the RWA national policy that I would like to highlight here on the next slide is your furniture and limited personal property. So this is a common question for us. GSA as a whole does have the authority to purchase furniture and in personal property. However, the whole shebang was delegated to FAST, Federal Acquisition Services, our sister. PBS can only do it under certain circumstances. So these are circumstances where we've worked with FAST and they've actually redelegated that portion of the purchase of personal property and furniture to us. So that's what we're going to go through here right now. We can purchase limited personal property and furniture for your agency when it is related to a PBS construction project that we were doing. What do I mean by limited personal property? What I mean by that is any personal property that is affixed, connected, or adapted to our building. If it is not affixed, connected, or adapted to our building, then that is something we do not have the authority to purchase for you. even if it is related to a construction project. So, what standalone options do we have? We do have an agreement with FAST to do a standalone furniture option for you. Basically, we call it SOFA, which is standalone furniture acquisition. Basically, it's what it stands for. It does have to meet certain requirements. I think that it's a $1 million threshold. Anything over $1 million, PBS does have to give FAST the first right of refusal to actually take the project, but we can under certain circumstances. Sorry. Limited personal property, though, is one we do not have a standalone option for. So standalone is anything outside of a PBS construction project. I'm sorry, I should have said that before there. So if you have a need as a standalone option for personal property, even if it's a fixed connected to or adapted to our building, we do not have the delegation from FAST to actually do that work for you. All right, so let's skip to the next slide. Let's get more into the meat and guts and stuff, and let's talk severable versus non-severable, which is another confusing area for some people. So when we do our projects, the projects are either considered severable or non-severable projects. What does that mean? A severable project is one that is continuing in nature. So basically, a benefit is received each time that service is performed for you. An example of that, would be for when your overtime utilities, your janitorial contracts, stuff like that. You're receiving a benefit each time that service is performed. So that's what's considered a severable project. The non-severable projects are ones that are a single outcome, meaning your benefit is only received once the entire project is complete. So there is a difference between the two. It's whether, you receive a benefit each time that service is performed, or you don't get that benefit until the entire project is done. So this slide is going to take us into the RWA types. Now, this is good information for your agencies to know. PBS actually will determine the type based off, certain aspects. Basically, what is the RWA for? PBS will determine the type because the types help us for reporting purposes and to know kind of more, what this project entails. So let's talk about severable services first. So a severable service, we have 3 different types of RWAs that could be for a severable service. We're going to talk first about the R type and the N type. So the R type severable service is tied to a single fiscal year. It is for the services where the costs aren't readily identifiable. And what do I mean by that? I mean when we are, maybe you're in one of our locations with multiple agencies and it's not separately metered. That's what I mean. We pay a mass utility bill. That is when an R type would come into play because it's basically based off of, divisions and, the estimates are last year's services and the whole 9 yards. So when your costs aren't readily identifiable and we have to pay by that mass contract, then it's going to be an R type. R types have a flat fee of $500, which is billed in the first billing cycle. And I wanted to clarify here, sometimes there are multiple billings on one RWA, which is allowed per policy in certain circumstances, which is fine. Under the severables program, though, they have the master estimate, and then they'll have the child estimates. The $500 fee is applicable to each of those child estimates. So if you have 5 child estimates out there rolled up into one master estimate, it'll be 500 times 5 for each of those child estimates. Now your N type for your severable services, okay, I forgot to mention one thing. R types, like I said, are tied to a single fiscal year, meaning they will automatically close on September 30th of every year. Your N types are different because we can cross fiscal years, but are limited to 365 days for a severable N type RWA. The other caveat to that, though, is that those services must be awarded within the same fiscal year of acceptance of the RWA. So say we took one in, a severable service RWA that was good from May 1st to April 30th. Fine and dandy, but the contract itself that we use for those services has to be obligated by us prior to September 30th of that year. Now, your end type is different on your fees because it is subject to the RWA management fee, which is just basically a step fee structure. All right, so let's flip to the next slide and let's talk a little bit on non-severable. And I did say there are 3 types that do severable services, but the next slide we're going to go into the F type, which is our little unique boy. So we're going to talk non-severable and severable on that same slide. But anyway, so on your non-severable, GSA could use either an N A type or a B type. N types will be used by us basically for your small repairs and alterations. It's a standalone project. It's not tied to anything else. So that's when we would use the N type. The A type is when that project is basically split funded, meaning there's PBS money in there and there's your guys' money, the customer funding in there. So that is, if we're like, it's one of our own buildings, we're using our BA 54 funding to do a portion of it for the core shell or whatever, and your agency wants to add some more on there, that is the instance when we would use the A types. A B type non-severable would be used for anything that is related to a prospectus project, and that is regardless of the dollar value of the RWA. So the RWA amount might be below prospectus, but the funds itself are tied to an overall prospectus project. That is when we would issue it a B type number, and it just basically tells us that this is tied to prospectus out there. All right, so on the next slide, we're going to get into the bad little boy, the F types I talked about. They are what we consider a low risk RWA. An F type can come in as severable or non-severable, and depending if, project related or services related. I want to remind everybody here, actually, I don't think I said it on the other slide, but severable and non-severable services cannot be on the same RWA. So if you're wanting to submit one F type for miscellaneous services for, service and project related, we can't do it. We cannot mix severable and non-severable on the same RWA. So what's the benefit of an F type? The benefit is, number one, they will automatically close at the end of the fiscal year. So therefore, like I said, we consider those low risk. They require basically no detailed estimate. However, we do require either a RITA SCE or OUE in the system on that, and that's because we have to tack on our fees and stuff. So I hear a question here, what is an SCE and what is an OUE? Just to tell you here. So an SCE is a summary cost estimate in RITA. It is for project related work. An OUE is basically your above standard estimate that we'll use, your services part. So you've got SCE for projects, OUE out there for your services. So the other part of an F type is you don't have to have a defined scope of work. It can be vague. And what I mean by that is it can be for miscellaneous services or your as needed services. It's stuff that you have ready to use, but you may not have a need for it. A lot of people or a lot of agencies will send them in kind of like little blankets, for miscellaneous projects throughout the year, just to have on hand. So maybe you go in and the door handle on one of your doors is broke. Instead of having to go through the whole process of getting the funding there, you've got this little RWA here that you can automatically hit against. So you do have limitations with it though. An F-type RWA cannot exceed more than $250,000 for your authorized amount, and a single transaction, including fees, cannot exceed more than $50,000. So you do have some limitations there. Those are to help us keep it, the low risk RWA, so we don't have to require as much documentation. The other part about this is the work or services must be completed by September 30th. And what do I mean by must be completed? I mean the work, or if it's a service we're providing you, has to be done by September 30th. So with that said, as you can tell, I'm about ready to lose my voice here. I'm going to turn it over to Jesse to go more into the project and process part of this for you. Take it away,
Hey,
Jesse.
everybody. Can everyone hear me? All right. So I'm going to run the process part of this presentation. So I'll be just spent a long time talking about a lot of the heavy policy related stuff, right? So that's like the why, and it's in the weeds, and it's in depth because it kind of has to be. It just is what it is. So this process section is a little bit lighter because it's the implementation. So we're not going to get into appropriations law as much unless it relates to kind of what I'm going to be talking about. And it's really just referencing back to what LB has already touched on. So a couple of big things, e-reader access, we're going to talk about really quickly, difference between a work request and an RWA, requirements development, estimates, intake and submission of RWAs, amendments, and end-of-year deadlines. So let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so Rita, I feel like I tried to do some quick math in my head when you all answered that poll question. And I want to say something like 70% of you use it at least every 4 weeks. That was kind of my takeaway. So that's a lot. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of use. So I'm assuming a lot of you are relatively familiar with it. But for those of you who aren't, Rita is our system of record for tracking RWAs. There's the two sides of it, eRita and Rita, and they're really just the same thing. It's just the way you access them. So eRita, think external customers. You are external to GSA, so you are the customers. I don't even know if you need to worry about use of the terms. Rita is where the RWAs are. If you're going to track or search for your work request, you are going to find it in the right system. Don't worry about if you have an E before it or not. Some big things about eRita, data visibility. So they're going to be based on your AB codes. So say you're an employee at FBI, you'll only be able to see things that are related to your AB code. So obviously that's like a PII thing. That's, we can't have every single agency accessing every single agency's details. So you will be limited to your AB code. Now, some of you have different AB codes, some of you have multiple. Let's quickly talk about the eRita application process, and we can touch on that a tiny bit. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is the landing page for the eRita user account request process on the gsa.gov/RWA site. Excellent, excellent, excellent site. I mean, I'm not biased or anything, but I think it's pretty good. And this is where you'll find how to access eRita. It's going to walk you through it. I'm not going to go into detail because we just did training 2 weeks ago on eRita Digest, and there's so much good information there. But I just want to know, in case we have like a little bit of a different field of people here attending, it's good to know this is out there. This is how you get your eRita user account set up. And the next slide here, this is where you can get some really great eRita training. So this is obviously an older screenshot, right? But there was one 2 weeks ago on eRita Digest. So I think it's a great resource. You can watch it. And Rachel, who's answering all your questions, is the one who put it on, and she does an amazing job. So go give that a watch. Next slide, please. All right, now it's like more of the process part here. So work request versus an RWA. This is one of those things, it's like, is it semantics? Does it matter? And the answer is it does. It helps. And the reason why it matters is because when you come to our team or you come to your RWA manager and you need some help, if you can get the semantics right from the get-go, it makes everything a lot faster. So work request is basically the informal identification of a need in Rita. It gets a 7-digit number, starts with a W. That number will follow it through its life cycle. There are a handful of very tiny exceptions we don't need to get into. But in general, that's how it works. And this just kind of tells GSA, like, hey, let's get a PM, let's get requirements going, let's get an SCE, etc. There's no funding attached. There's no rules that apply because it's just a hold in our system, essentially. The RWA is the formal agreement. As LB said, it's the OMB approved agreement for us to take in your money on a reimbursable basis. And appropriations law and RWA policy apply. So that is when, once that agreement is signed, you have an RWA and all those things apply. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is our high-level view of RETA statuses. So I counted 6. I'm pretty good at counting. I'm gonna double check 6 of them. This is the status you see in RETA. So like, don't associate this with any like process flows outside of our RETA system. This is how RETA classifies the status. Nevertheless, though, it's really good to talk about it in that way because I think it breaks it down in a really nice way. So let's talk about the first one there. Pre-planning. This is essentially your draft status. So this is where you, PM from BOR, go in, you create your work request, you type in a couple things. We need to fix this bathroom on the 2nd floor. And you're like, I'm going to come back to this. You hit save and you don't send it to GSA. That is your draft work request. We can't see that in our system. We can see it in our system, sorry, but it doesn't come to us. It's not in our court to handle. That is with you all. You get it out of this status by sending it to GSA. Once it's sent to GSA, it is an unassigned status. GSA has it. It's our work. It's unassigned. We need to get a PM assigned to it. Once we assign the PM to it, you will get an email. That will be the next slide, but we're going to stay here for a second. You're going to get an email saying who the PM is, that it was assigned. That moves you to this next phase, and this is the most important kind of long-lasting phase, right? This is requirements development, so this can take a while depending on the project. So this is where you and your GSA teammate hammer out the scope, the estimate, the budget, everything. You get everything done. This is where you all put in your financial information in there. And this is basically all the work leading up to accepting that RWA. So pending new, that's when it's been sent to GSA and we are ready to process it. Our RWA managers, a lot of them are on this call. They're all like amazing, super, super intelligent. Like they just know everything about the program. They all get the RWA. They're the ones who perform the review on it to kind of adhere to everything that LB said. And then it goes out for signatures. Once it's signed, you have an accepted RWA. Okay, so now that's like the high level overview. Let's go into some of the detail of it. We're not going to like belabor too much of it. So this is what I was saying about the assigned email. You get this email and it's like, hey, you have this PM assigned. Reach out to them. Let's get the ball rolling. The PM gets the same thing as well. So they're going to be like, oh, I have a project assigned to me. There are names blocked out here. So those big gray boxes, those are actually names. We can't share them, but that's what you would normally see. So that's your first big communication from GSA. Here's your PM. Let's get the ball rolling on requirements development. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, okay. I believe, James, are you going to run this one and then I'm going to help answer?
That is correct. So we're going to give you a little bit of time to recover from all this presenting. And the question is, true or false, a work request is a formal agreement between PBS and a customer. So you only have 2 options for this, true or false. So you have a 50-50 shot of being correct. So we'll let people vote here. And I think everyone has voted, so we're going to share the results. And it looks like 77% said false. Jesse, how'd they do?
You did great. So 77% of you were right, 23% of you were wrong. So the training is going to start over now for the 23% of you, and 77% of you get an extra bonus. I'm just kidding. But the work request is not the formal agreement. That's like our informal identification in the system, right? This is how we get all the pieces into the system of record, Rita, to get everybody doing what they need to do, get it talking to everything. The RWA is the formal agreement. It's an executed document. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so remember my 6 statuses. We talked about planning, pre-planning. That's your draft status for the customer. Unassigned, told you get that email. We saw that email. Next, we go to planning, estimating status in Rita, which is your requirements development phase. This is where the bulk of the work is happening. So, I mean, this is obviously not a PM training, right? So we're not going to get into depth on all these things, but as it pertains to this process, this is where you want to dial in that scope for all the reasons that LB said before. This is where it's important to have that dialed in because, like she said, the rules don't come into play until you get that document executed, right? So like everything after that is essentially scope locked to a certain degree. This is where your schedule and budget come into play. Obviously, things can happen and change with your budget. That is the reality of the work we all do. But we need to have it as best we can, right? So this is your requirements development phase. This is what you're doing before that RWA is getting accepted. Real quick, lots of compliance requirements come in. It's going to depend on the project, but ABAS, historical preservation, policy, but that's like kind of like in general, RWA policy, pricing policy, other places in GSA have their own versions. Those all will come into play, and I'm sure you as customer do as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is going to look familiar, hopefully, if you're paying attention, but this is essentially when LB was describing the use of funds before. So your use of funds has to have intent, content, extent. It has to be a specific need, and we can't just spend money on anything we want on this RWA. It needs to have a specific purpose. So the intent is the objective. So FBI is moving to a new office space and it's going to be in Alabama. That's your intent. Content, build us a 100,000 square foot building. That's your content. Extent is the exact place that happens. So a lot of times it's not really known at the early stages. When you send this in, you might not know. Hey, we're going through all this to figure out where exactly it's going to be. But we will know at some point, and we will know before RWA acceptance. That's the most important thing. So once you get once the RWA is accepted, the scope is locked after the initial FY of acceptance, right? So really important to get that dialed in. Next slide, please. Okay, read a cost estimate. So there's lots of estimates that are created for projects. Could be the customer, could be the construction the construction GC, or it could be internal to GSA, so an IGE, internal independent government estimate. That estimate is created, there's due diligence done, everybody comes to agreement on it, it's executed by the estimator on certain level projects. That needs to get into our system. And if we're talking about projects, that's going to go into the SCE. So we take those numbers from that estimate, put it into the SCE, and the SCE is the way we calculate our fees. The SCE is not per se an estimate. Yes, it has the values from estimates, but it is the way that we are taking your costs and translating them to financial terms and applying the fees. So SCEs, that's your projects. You have ECCA, contingency, design, CM&I, and FF&E costs. Those are broken out. We will see that shortly. O&E, OUEs, that's for services. So all things are broken out on those. We're not going to show any OUEs today, but we are going to dive into the SCE shortly. So can we go to the next slide? Oops. Okay. You're good here. I just skipped my notes. All right. So what I was saying about the RWA fee, we calculate the RWA fee on the amounts that go into the SCE, which are based on the estimates. Now, what is included in the RWA fee? Certain things are not. So those things that are not are called direct costs. They will be a different line on the SCE. And I know I'm going to say something I've been saying a lot again. You will see that soon when we show the SCE, but you will see that there's a line item there for direct costs. All these things here, travel costs and GSA time outside of 50 miles from the nearest GSA office, those are not included in the general RWA fee. This is not determined by our team, so you can't get mad at us. It's determined by the pricing policy team. We have a link there, but that will kind of go through the details of how all that works. Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about indirect costs. So indirect costs, let's think about this as overhead. This is the overhead. This is the RWA fee. This is what's included in our RWA fee. You're going to see at the bottom of your SCE. For recurring RWA, so this is going to sound very similar to LB's slide before where she had recurring versus non-recurring. Recurring RWAs have a flat $500 fee. If you have multiple child estimates, the same fee is applied. This is our, these fees in general are the overhead for our program, the RETA system. It's not cheap to run like a huge system like this. It requires lots of maintenance. It requires lots of upgrades we would like to do. These are things that require funding, and this is how that program is funded. Also, certain finance personnel. You can get your fee refunded if the RWA is canceled and no costs are incurred. Same thing, generally speaking, for non-recurring. The big difference is that it's a single-step fee structure. So minimum is 500 and go up from there. So $10 million RWA is going to be a lot. And if it's a smaller RWA, it's going to be a little bit of a bigger portion of that cost, but it's going to be a lot smaller in general. So it applies to all costs except for personal property, FF&E. And the way the SCE is laid out, which you'll see soon, you can kind of see that math working out. So let's actually get the ball rolling on looking at the SCE. Next slide, please. Okay, so once your customer finishes the SCE, once your GSA PM finishes the SCE, this is the email you get. They put all that information in there. Hopefully you've already seen your IGE and everything. They hit approve and it's going to you. And you're going to see this as long as you are the person of record on the RWA, on the first page of the RWA in RETA. There's lots of great information about like all those fields in Rachel's training. So if to you that seems like, am I really that person on all these? Maybe go watch that if you didn't attend, and you can double check on some of yours. So you get this, you're like, wow, my PM did the estimate. Great. Let's go check it out in RETA because that means I can get the ball rolling on getting this funded and everything. So next slide, please. Okay, so you get that email and you're like, you know what, I'm going to dive into this. I want to make sure everything matches because I'm a detail-oriented person. I want to make sure everything looks good. So here's your SCE, and hopefully lots of you have seen this. I would imagine, given what you all said about your use of RETA, this is probably going to be one of the points you are, especially if you're on the PM side of house, CO side of house, maybe not the finance, but regardless, this is the SCE format. So it's basically just a bunch of rows and columns of costs and what they're associated to. So we have two initial columns. You can see that there. One on the left, and it's not highlighted in green, it's the GSA shell costs. So those are GSA costs. And that can apply in a variety of reasons. We're not going to get super in the weeds on that. The majority of the costs are going to be tenant costs, right? So your ECCA is your estimated cost of construction at award. That's generally speaking where you're going to see that like amount that you have on the IGE associated with the construction. It should go in there. We also have our construction contingency. So there's lots of ways it can be calculated. For this example, we have a percent of line 1. So here we have 27,000. We have a percent of line 1 at 10%. That is 2,700. And then you can see that the next line below, line 3, is just simply adding those two lines up. You would see the BSAC on here as well, but more importantly, what I want to touch on is the glossary. So in general on Rita, if you see a blue hyperlink, click on it and it will explain it better to you. So there's lots on there, like the TI scenario, construction contingency. I work in the system like 1,000 times a day, and I use the glossary still for certain statuses and things like that, and I find it very helpful. So use it. It's great, and it will definitely help you. This is the first page of your SCE. Let's go to the next slide. We'll see the second page of the SCE. Okay, additional project cost tab. This is the second tab of the SCE, and it's the final tab that has like the numbers tabulated on it. So this is the big one where you're going to see direct labor costs. So in this instance, we have 0. But say that the PM was traveling and it was going to cost them, for some reason, they were going to travel, they needed to get there way more times than was the normal allowable times. You would see that extra travel in here, or they were further away. That would be in there. Say it was in-house design services for GSA, you would see that there. You should also be able to see an estimate for those actual costs as well, because they are not coming up with these costs out of thin air. We have like great tools on our project management side of the house that they use to estimate these costs. And you can see that as you roll down the costs from line 14 down to 21, they're all subtotaled. And at line 22, the RWA management fee is applied to it. So everything above there has the RWA management fee applied to it. And then right below on line 24, that's your total project cost with the RWA management fee. Now we talked briefly about FF&E and personal property, etc. Line 25, 26, 27, if you had values in there, those would not apply to the RWA fee. So if you're buying personal property, and I'll be explained all the rules pertaining to that. So like it has to be within that realm of what we allow. It would be below on the SCE, and therefore the RWA management fee is not applied to that. The RWA management fee does not apply to that. So it's in this order on purpose. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, we're going to talk about this valid through feature for a couple of slides. It's really great. So estimate valid through. You'll see that big red arrow pointing to it. That is when that estimate expires. So right now you have approved estimate, but when that date hits, if there is no action taking, the estimate is expired, it reverts to pending status. So the estimate status will say pending, and you as the customer at that point won't be able to take action on it. So the reason why this was done was a litany of reasons, but a lot of times these things were just sitting out there for forever, and customers want to take action on them, and then they do 2 years later, and the estimate came in before COVID, and now we're in the post-COVID world, and it's like, okay, well, that's obviously not even remotely applicable to this project anymore. So it was there to make sure that we're doing a gut check on our estimates before you all start funding them. So the timeline is 90 days. And let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about a little bit more about it. 2 weeks before that timeline expires, you're going to get this email. It will go similar to a lot of things. It will go to a lot of the contacts associated with the work request. And it's going to remind you like, hey, in 2 weeks, this is going to expire, but you can fund this now and it'll be all hunky-dory. So if everything looks good still, you can still fund it at that point. However, if that 90 days hits, estimate goes to pending status and nothing can happen anymore, essentially. So if you see this, it's best to take action as soon as possible. Okay, one more slide on this SCE valid through feature. So this is a really cool feature. And this is that you can all request a revised SCE. So anytime you click the edit button on your work request, this little pop-up will come up. Hey, your summary cost estimate has expired. So this is in instances where 90 days has come and gone, no one has talked, but you go to edit something and you're like, hey, I really need to get back to this work request. You can go in here and you can hit edit, and this will pop up, and most likely you're going to want to say okay. So it's going to send a ping over to your PM to take a look. They can do a gut check, and maybe they're like, hey, these costs are still definitely valid, and like this was an estimate that was built in to account for time and the schedule and everything. So like, this is good to go. Okay, approved, done, move on. Or maybe they're like, no, these costs are completely invalid now. So either way, it kicks it back to your GSA PM. It puts them back on their radar. So a really good feature to use. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so you have your approved estimate. It's valid. None of that stuff has happened. Or maybe it was invalid and now it's valid and it's approved and everything is buttoned up and ready to go. You all as a customer have to go out and go in and fill in your financial information in eRETA. You have to fund it, put in your TAS. All this financial information, once again, great details of that in the eRETA Digest training. So take a look at that. But let's assume that you have an SCE and an accounting line in RETA that match and everything is good to go. That's when you click send to GSA. It's going to send out yet another email and it's going to tell everybody this is ready for acceptance. And acceptance is when we start the ball rolling on making this a legal binding contract. So after submission, what to expect. There'll be, if there's errors or anything like that, you will be reached out to by a GSA individual. Potentially it could be the RWA manager, potentially it's your PM. The GSA PM is going to compile a bunch of documents and they're going to submit the RWA in our internal system via our acceptance review form for review. It's going to be routed for signatures via DocuSign. The customer will receive the email and then GSA will receive the email for the DocuSign. Customer signs, GSA signs. And then OCFO takes over to get that fully accepted into our system. Big thing here is just be patient. There's 6 RWA managers. There used to be a lot more. They have a big workload. A lot of PMs are new. People are doing their best to get things through. A lot of new processes that we have that are definitely really good, but still just kind of like we're still kind of working out the little kinks in them. So just be patient with us. More communication is always a good thing as long as it's nice communication and understanding communication. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we talked about the signatures. This is what it looks like. You get this email from DocuSign. This is like your generic DocuSign email, so it shouldn't look any different. Customers will sign the RWA first. GSA signs it second. If customer declines, the RWA reverts back to pending status. OCFO, they can change signatures if necessary. If you're like, hey, this approving official at FBI, like they're on maternity leave for the next 3 months. Like, why are you sending this to them? Reach out, we can fix that. Abandon the signatures, get it sent to someone new. Big thing to note here, and a common confusion even within our own agency, is that you don't need to be a RETA. You don't have to have eRETA or RETA access to do DocuSign, right? DocuSign is just, you're going to open this up and you're going to see that F2957 form, which is the RWA, and you're going to be signing a form. So your approving official doesn't need to have access to the system. They just need to be able to sign in DocuSign. All right, I think I'm done for now. I'm going to kick it back over to LB to talk about amendments briefly, and I will catch back up with you guys in a couple slides.
All right, thanks, Jesse. We're going to talk about RWA amendments on this slide, but I do want to thank Jesse for pointing something out that I forgot to mention to you guys on the furniture slide. So as Jesse had said, when it is related to a PBS project and you have furniture or limited personal property on there, the purchase, only the acquisition of such items are not subject to our RWA management fee. However, what is subject is, like Jesse was saying, your installation costs, your labor costs, anything like that would be subject to the 4% fee, or I'm sorry, RWA management fee. You can tell how long I've been here because I'm still thinking of the 4% fee. But anyway, I just wanted to clarify that real fast. So let's talk about RWA amendments. So I gave you a highlights of our policy, appropriations law. Jesse gave you, the highlights of our process and how we work it through to create an RWA. So what happens if you need to amend the RWA? You need to increase the cost for some reason. Let's talk about what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. So what is acceptable for an RWA amendment? If it's a within scope cost increase due to an antecedent liability. You remember we talked about antecedent liabilities earlier. Additions to the scope within the initial year of RWA acceptance. So if you submit an RWA to us in January of this year, and maybe it's recarpet and repaint of one room, but you want to do a second room too, you're still in the initial year of acceptance of that RWA, so you can amend the scope to add that second room onto that RWA. Or a reduction in scope. Maybe you're down the process and the project costs have gone too much and you need to reduce the scope because your agency just can't afford it. That is acceptable too. Not acceptable is, scope changes outside of the initial year of acceptance of the RWA, and that is regardless of the funding source that your agency is using, or extending the period of performance for severable services after the initial year of RWA acceptance. All right, let's flip to the next slide here, and let's talk about how do you fund these amendments. So, if you're in the initial year of acceptance of the RWA and you're adding scope, of course, your funding there is still open for new obligational purposes. That's fine. You would do that. So, per appropriations law, if it's tied to an antecedent liability, you have to basically use funding from the year the bona fide need was established. So what do I mean by that? Let's say we took an RWA in 2025 per project. We're working it, costs have increased, materials went up or whatever, and we need to collect $1,000 more from you. When your agency amends it, you should be using a funding source that was available to you in 25 when the bona fide need was established. Does it have to be the original funding source that you guys used to fund it in the first place? No, but it has to be a funding source that was available to you for new obligational purposes in fiscal year 25. So example, like I said, maybe we took one last year and it was an annual 25. So it expired on September 30th, 2025. We're increasing it now, and your agency may use a Know Your Fund because the Know Your Fund was available to your agency last year. Or you could use a multi-year fund that was maybe, it goes through 23 or 26 because, in 25, those funds were available to you for new obligational purposes. So that is the type of funding you use. And that's also a confusion area is, well, our funds expired on September 30th for new obligational purposes. That's true. You can't do any new obligations against that funding. However, that funding will be there through the liquidation period for any antecedent liabilities that may arise during that time. So what happens if maybe your agency has absolutely no funding, either annual, multi-year, maybe you don't have a Know Your funding source at all. You have no funding left from the year bona fide need to fund this antecedent liability. We can use current fiscal year funds. So you can amend with current fiscal year funding, but we do have what we call a statement of further written assurance that your agency must sign, which basically attests to we have absolutely no funding available to us from 2025 that the bona fide need was established and we need to use current year funding. So that's basically all that document says. But in order for us to accept the additional monies and you're using current fiscal year funds, we have to have the statement of further written assurance signed. All right, so are you guys ready for your surprise? Because I got a good one for you. Let's flip to the next slide, please. All right, let's talk about the end of year fiscal year deadline. This is hot off the presses here. September 9th is the deadline for a fully executable RWA. You guys are the first to know about this date. The official communication is forthcoming and will actually be out later this afternoon. So you guys are getting a precursor to this date. So there's your surprise. We've actually got the date out there now. All right, so let's talk to the year deadline. What that deadline is means we have to have, PBS GSA has to have what we consider a fully executable RWA by September 9th. Now, does that mean your agency just submitted us a work request? Submitting just a work request is not considered a fully executable RWA. We need more than that. So we need your agency to actually submit the work request to us. We'll have to have a PM assigned. You'll have to have worked with the PM and define the scope of work like Jesse was talking about, and actually got an estimate to it, to where, we've been able to create an IGE. We've been able to, create the STE off of it and get it submitted to you guys saying, hey, you want this project, we can do it, but it's going to cost you $100,000. From there, once you guys get that, that's your cue to actually send us the funds. So once your agency funds it and submits it back to GSA, meaning you have to hit that button after you put your funding on there, submit to GSA, that is what's considered a fully executable RWA. Like I said, just submitting a work request is not considered a fully executable RWA. We got to have A, B, and C going with it in order to make it a fully executable RWA. All right, so there was your surprise, your year-end deadline. Let's flip to the next slide here, and I'm going to turn it back over to James for poll question number 4.
Sure.
Take it away,
Thanks.
James.
Well, hey, no problem. Thank you. Hey, I just want to make sure that everybody is putting their questions in the Q&A pod as far as the material that you're seeing today. That will be really helpful for us so we can have our subject matter experts tackle those questions in the Q&A pod. Again, the chat pod is just for administrative issues that you're having throughout the presentation. And yes, you will receive a copy of this presentation. I think we probably covered that a couple times, but yes, you'll get it. We promise. True or false, signatures are required in order to meet the RWA submission deadline. So Laura Beth has talked about this in a couple slides. Give everyone a second to answer. Oh, boy, this is a horse race. We're going to go ahead and end the poll, and we're going to share the results. So there you go, almost 50-50. Laura Beth, what do you think of those results? Do they need a signature to meet that RWA submission deadline?
You do not need a signature to submit the RWA or to have a fully executable RWA. Yes, you don't need the signature. Like I said, you just have to, submit the work request, have a PM assigned to it. They've given you the IGE, they've given you the cost, and your agency has submitted the funds to GSA for acceptance. That's all you need. So a signature is actually not required for that process.
All right, we'll go ahead and close out that poll and we'll continue on with the presentation. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. So we have 4 more slides left of material, one concept for the most part. This is project closeout. So there's 2 timing pieces at project closeout I want to focus on. The first one is substantial completion, and the second one is financial closeout. So substantial completion, if this is a PM crowd, I'm sure you're very well aware, it's declared the beneficial use of the work. So BLM is moving into their new space in Lakewood. They have everything done except for like some ceiling tiles. There's some of the cove base missing. They can still use the space. They can use their space for what it was intended to be used for. So at that point, it would be called substantially complete. Sure, there are punch list items remaining, but the project is substantially complete. At this point, GSA will send the substantial completion letter to the customer. And very specifically, customers should not deobligate funds at this point, right? Because this is still an active RWA. Things may come up. Punch list items may lead to new punch list items. But nevertheless, this is essentially putting your project on the clock for financial closeout, right? So let's go to the next slide. We'll see what this letter looks like. So here's your letter, slightly redacted again, but you can see that in red down at the bottom, do not deobligate the funds. Very important. You are just substantially complete at this point. We are not ready to do so. Let's talk about financial closeout, and you'll see when to do so. So next slide, please. Okay, so financial closeout. This is when your punch list is done. Everybody's paid. All the obligations and invoices are closed out. The customer billing and collection is complete. That is when we are at financial closeout. That's when this RWA is ready to be financially closed. At this point, you'll get the closeout letter. And at that moment, you can deobligate the amount on that closeout letter. So let's go to the next slide here. Here's your closeout letter. Right at the bottom, there is your deobligation amount. So at that point, you have the green light to go ahead and do so. You have a RWA that is considered fully closed out. That is all. I believe I'm kicking it over back to James.
Yes, you are. We're going to go to the Project Pulse survey slide. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I think I've been a part of this survey for a few years. And the Project Pulse survey, what it is we want to hear from you, right? So if you're not familiar with the survey, it's a survey that is sent to usually a PM on the agency side or a facilities person that's designated as the receiver of the survey. And it is sent through various milestones throughout the project so we can check in, at the start as far as gathering requirements, the construction, how's it going? We get to the end, how was the project? I'm oversimplifying, but there's definitely more milestones in this than just that. The Project Pulse survey, it will say, how did GSA do in the subject line? And it's sent from Project Pulse surveys at research.gsa.gov. So make sure that it is not, a scam or any kind of like junk email that's coming from an unknown source. That's the email address that it's going to be coming from. And so customers are asked to rate us as far as project management for overall satisfaction, the communication, the clear point of contact, requirements, scope, schedule, budget, and then just tell us about the experience with our project management team. And we do read those. I will tell you that we do read those, and those are shared with the project team. Good, bad, indifferent. We definitely take that feedback, and if anything, we try to implore some of that feedback onto the next project. So you're not only helping the project that you're in, but you're going to help future project managers on other projects as they take them. So, and we do have a lot of new people, as Jesse had alluded to. So we do have a link to the web page on this slide. So if you need more information on the Project Pulse survey, and you can click on that, but stay tuned. If you're a part of a project, you'll probably see one in the future. We'll advance to the next slide. I think we have this might be our final poll question. I believe it is. As a result of today's session, how much more comfortable are you with PBS RWA policies and processes? A, much more comfortable. B, somewhat more comfortable. C, I'm still going to need some more support, which is totally fine because that's what we're here for. So we'll give a second here for those to answer. All right, we'll go ahead and close out the poll and release the results. It looks like 50% are somewhat more comfortable, which is great. We got 26% much more comfortable, and 24%, I'm still going to need some more support. So half are comfortable, the other half, they need some more support, but that's totally fine. That's what we're here for. That's why we have our subject matter experts in these presentations to answer those questions. Make sure you're putting those questions in the Q&A pod, because at the end of this presentation, unfortunately, we're going to run out of time, but we'll leave this presentation open as far as it being live, and we can record all those questions and then put those in a frequently asked document as this presentation gets released. So go ahead and give it back to the presenters.
All right. Thanks, James.
Sure.
All right. So for those of you that probably still need some more help and support, this is for you, and actually for everybody, but it's to know who to contact with your questions. So let's go to the next slide here, and here's your support. We've got actually a lot of support. If you have general RWA questions, we have the Ask RWA mailbox that can actually assist with those general questions. If you have more specific questions to a specific project and stuff, you maybe want to know the status of it, you can contact either the assigned PM POC that you can find the name of the PBS person in eReader. You can contact them, or you can contact the RWA manager. The RWA managers are a wealth of information and can help in some instances too. Maybe you have eReader questions. Well, we have the eReader email, the eReader@gsa.gov. If you have eReader training material questions, maybe you want to know more about it, how to access it, the whole 9 yards, go to gsa.gov/eReader. And maybe you just want more general information on the RWA program anyway. Go to gsa.gov/RWA. There you're going to find the RWA policy that I went through, the memo that I talked about on electronic payments. You're going to find a whole wealth of information located out there too. So on this next slide, like I said, your RWA managers are a wealth of information. Here are the 6 RWA managers by state of the work that they do. So if your particular project is in the state of, let's just say Texas or something, then Sarah Johnson would be your person to go to. Maybe it's in Nevada, or Nevada, sorry. It would be Benicia Surrey, who would be your RWA manager. So like I said before, these people are a wealth of information that can also help on the specific stuff going through here. All right, so that's basically it for Jesse and I. I'm going to kick it back to James right now to talk about some upcoming training real fast. Thanks,
you. Laura. Yep, thanks, Laura Beth. You see on the slide there, we have the GSA Water Quality Management Update, and this is probably a long time coming, but this session will review results of the baseline water testing initiative and GSA control facilities, lessons learned and best practices from water quality management, GSA strategy, next steps, and customer tenant expectations for water quality and GSA control facilities. So make sure and tune in on June 17th. You've got the link there to register for that webinar. I can't promise that I'll be the host for that one, but that should be a good one to attend. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. It's the thank you slide. So thank you for attending today's webinar. Laura Beth, Jesse, is there any parting comments you'd like to make, or before I close this one out?
No, thanks everyone for joining.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you guys got information.
I think they did. I think we're getting a lot of kudos in the chat pod, so appreciate that. If there are any questions that are in the chat pod and you want them answered, please put those over to the Q&A pod. Like I said, we'll keep this live for a minute or so just to make sure that we can get those recorded and get those sent out as far as the answers to your questions. But with that, hey, there are many more CES sessions to come, so stay tuned to this station. The goal of the Client Enrichment Series is to engage our audience in workplace topics that contribute to your mission success and to the effective management of your real estate and workplace programs. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate it.